Welcome to the Lead Well podcast, where I have fascinating conversations with insightful female leaders who are changing the world to discover what leading well means to them. In these real conversations, we'll discover what makes them thrive, discover their journey, the challenges they've faced, and most importantly, how they navigate this decade of disruption and transformation. In each compelling conversation, you'll receive raw and relatable advice, thought-provoking ideas, and explore how to effectively lead from the front. Welcome to the Lead Well podcast. I'm Karen Phillips, and today we have the opportunity of speaking with a leading world specialist and advocate when it comes to diversity, inclusivity, and also very much accessibility. Those three words have become part of our day-to-day lives in corporate worlds. Well, what does it really mean, and how does it affect us into the future? We get to meet today the amazing Jessica Smith, who has the Order of Australia, represented Australia in the 2004 Paralympics, and is changing the world for future generations when it comes to seeing us all as exactly the same. Jessica Smith, Order of Australia, you're here living in the UAE, based out of Dubai. You're an extraordinary woman. You're an advocate for disability, for inclusion, and a whole lot of other aspects as well. Why Dubai and why now?
Well, I mean, the answer to that question is I came for my husband's job, like most expats.
Yes.
But in that time, we've been here for nearly 6 years. I've seen so many wonderful opportunities. And when you see an opportunity in the work that I do around diversity and accessibility, you know that you have to take up those opportunities. So it's been a really profound time for me personally, but also professionally. So I'm very, very excited and grateful to be here.
Well, we talk about Paralympians, and clearly, watching you today, there's a little part of your limb missing in being your left arm. And I wanted to ask about that. Let's start with that and move into then the inclusion space as well, and accessibility, because it's a word we're hearing so much more about in organisations, in universities, in schools, and of course, government sector as well. Take us way back, if you wouldn't mind, to you're born, you're missing part of a limb.
Yes, so I was born missing my left arm, and to this day, we still don't know why that occurred. There is some research that's been done in recent years to suggest that bands of amniotic fluid form and latch onto limbs in very, very early development. But at the time, we didn't know that. And so, scans weren't, a very common thing at the time. So my parents didn't know until I was born. But my parents were also advised for me to be fitted with a prosthetic limb from as young as possible to help aid my growth and development. But I think at the time, especially the medical professional saw disability through a medical lens, of course.
Yes.
And they assumed that a prosthesis would help me to develop and help me to fit in and to live a normal life. But I guess what was underestimated was the fact that my brain isn't wired to have two hands. And so when I put the prosthesis on at just 18 months of age, it's really difficult to get used to, because everything I was trying to do, I had to think so much harder about. It wasn't an easy transition, which I think everybody assumed it would be.
When you say that, an easy transition, and I want to bring this right back to the basics, is it because your body and your brain knows that your left arm stops here, and so therefore it prepares everything accordingly, and yet now you've got an extension which has no feeling at all, and you have to make way for that in every part of your life?
Exactly.
As a baby, 18, wow.
So for me, that was just my normal. My brain and my body knows where my arm ends. And so sensory and emotionally and physically, I know that. So when I put on the prosthesis, it was as if, how do I manage to control something that I literally have no control over? And it actually led to a really traumatic event in my life. My mum was in the kitchen one morning making morning tea, and I had the prosthesis on, and I snuck behind her. I noticed a plate of chocolate biscuits on the kitchen counter.
Yes.
As you do as a toddler. And I reached up to take a biscuit, but because I couldn't feel or detect heat through the prosthetic, I didn't realize that in that same process, I'd actually knocked a freshly boiled kettle over.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So as I looked up to take the biscuit, boiling water spilled down onto me, and I sustained third-degree burns to 15% of my body. And in that frenzy and chaos, my mum wanted to remove the prosthesis, which at the time wrapped around my entire body. So in that process, she unfortunately removed all of my skin. and I was rushed to Sydney Children's Hospital where we were living at the time. I underwent immediate skin grafting, and I was in and out of hospital for 2 or 3 years for that recovery process. I was young enough that I don't remember the specifics, but I grew up in a world where I was told I wasn't good enough, I wasn't strong enough, I wasn't pretty enough, I wasn't smart enough, all because of the way that I looked.
Well, when you say that, may I ask, you were told that. I can't imagine your parents. I mean, perhaps hearing doctors in the background talking quietly, that because I know and understand the water came across your chest, it came across your neck and part of your back. So it's obviously the upper area, which for a woman in other countries around the world perhaps is shown more. And so therefore there is a great effect.
Yes, and I think, the doctor said to my parents that, your daughter will grow up with body image issues. Now, at the time, no one was really talking about body image issues. So they also said to my mum, you have to practice tough love. My mum did that very, very well. Love her to bits. But there were times I was like, okay,
What's tough
tough
love?
love was just, not don't feel sorry for yourself.
Okay.
This is the cards that you've been dealt, and you have to figure out a way to adapt and figure out a way to fit into this world that wasn't designed for somebody like you. And so now I appreciate, that foresight that my mum had. But there were times when I was like, well, I'm struggling because I don't fit into this world. I'm the different one in every scenario, in every community, and I don't want to be the different one. And so I struggled with that, obviously growing up throughout my childhood, throughout my teens and into my early 20s, trying to understand my identity in a world that is so fixated on beauty and aesthetics. Where do I fit in? Because historically, people with disability are always seen as the villain or something to be afraid of. If you think of any book you've read or movie or television show,
The Hunchback of Notre Dame.
exactly.
Yes.
So there's always this association that disability is bad or wrong. So as a young child and as a teenage girl trying to fit in and feel accepted and belonging, there was a huge disconnect. And for me, it led to a very long battle of eating disorders and mental health issues, because I thought if I could control my weight, yes, and if I could fit within the parameters of what society says is beautiful and perfect, knowing that my arm will never grow back and I'll always have such prominent scarring, maybe then I'll somehow be able to get people to look past the obvious imperfections, and then maybe I'll be accepted, and then maybe I'll be happy. But of course, we know living with eating disorders and mental health struggles, there needs to be a lot more conversation around that. And at the time when I was experiencing it, there wasn't. So there was the stigma and the guilt. And I didn't want to be even more of a burden on society than what I felt I was as being a female.
There's such weight in this, though, isn't there? I mean, I'm feeling it. I've almost got tears in my eyes listening to this story of this incredibly successful woman that has had to go through this. And we're going to unwrap this in a moment, and how it's changed and how you're building and working towards even more change as we lead into the future. But during that time, you became a swimmer. Why swimming? Was it the isolation? Was it in the water where there was no, what we'd call now, white noise? Why do you think swimming? Were your parents swimmers?
I think what you just said initially is a massive part of it. I was able to do it alone. Whenever I played team sports as a child, I automatically assumed that if we lost or it was somehow my fault, I was always seen as the weakest link. So I didn't want that pressure. But there was also a component with swimming that there was no opportunity to wear any aids or anything that would help me. It was just me and my body in the water. And the faster I got, the more I realized that I was capable and I was good and I was talented.
You're allowed to say you were good. You represented Australia in the 2004 Paralympics. So
There was a bit of natural talent, but I think swimming, as you said, I could drown out the noise, and it was a place of freedom and tranquility. And the faster I got, it sort of, goes hand in hand, is that was an environment I wanted to be in because I could block out everything else. And when I was in that environment, I wanted to give it everything that I had as well. So I competed in my first school swimming event when I was 10, and I won the 50 meters freestyle, beating all the girls and boys with two arms. And, nobody else had a disability. And for me, that was the first time in my life I felt as though I was being acknowledged for what I could do, rather than the perceived limitation from others about what they thought I couldn't do. And I think, I think back now, having that level of self-awareness at the age of 10 is quite profound.
It's remarkable.
Also a sense of enormity and responsibility, because it was in that moment that I said, well, this is how I want to feel. I want to feel these good feelings. So swimming is creating that for me. It's bringing that for me. So I need to swim every day and forever.
And I want to bring up something which is probably not so acceptable, but you couldn't cheat.
No, exactly.
Because
Yeah,
I think there's a feeling as well as is help the little one out who has a disability so they feel like they're included. And by doing so, um, you actually have them stand out as a disability and you really put the spotlight on them. So when people are watching you, may I say, from the grandstand in a race, in the water, you are what you are. There's no magic.
exactly.
And so you have won line ball winning.
Yes, exactly.
So it's that feeling, and I understand what that must have been like for you at that time. And were your parents also then, they had that aha moment, that realization that, Jess is as good? Because this is also a story of your family. It's a story of your village. It's a story for all of us to relook at ourselves of how we consider what we call disability. And in the UAE, I'm profoundly excited because we in Australia, where I come from, we call it disability, but over here you have a different term for it.
Yeah, so people of determination is what is referred to here in the UAE. And I think that, that comes from a place of beautiful intention and wanting to support and wanting to empower. I think back to my parents, there were no resources, there were no groups that they could connect with to say, hey, how do we do this? And as a mother of 3 children myself now, I think that would have been a total moments or constant moments of despair, of just thinking, how do we ensure that we're giving the best opportunities for our daughter while also not overcompensating and doing things for her? And I think what they did so well is allowed me to find my own way of doing things, my own way of adapting. So everything from tying my shoelaces to doing my hair, they were there to help me. But they first told me I had to try because they couldn't show me. With them doing it with 2 hands wasn't
Yeah,
showing me how to do it.
it's such I mean, it's such a learning. And I know when we have spent time together, it's an automatic thinking you're helping by saying, can I hold your handbag?
Yes.
But you've got this, girlfriend.
Yes. Yes.
You've got it. But as a friend, I want to reach out and support and give. And that's not always, and I think this is a great learning piece. It's not always what's needed or what's required or wanted. And I
Yes.
think it's us, perhaps able-bodied humans, in whatever that actually means, considering as well, not just wanting to help, but what you may want and asking that question if and as it's needed.
Exactly. And I think, it's about asking. It's about giving the space to be able to say, hey, do you need help? I'm here if you do. And what I've learnt over the years is that people's intentions do come from a good place. So, but for many years in my teenage time, I was very resentful. I was like, I don't need your help. I don't want your help. And there was a lot of anger, of course, as a young adolescent. And I've realized now that if I want to see a change in the way the world views disability and the perspective we have around people of determination, I have to be part of that change. And that took me a long time because I wanted to disconnect from everything associated with disability. I didn't want to be known as the girl with a disability.
The poster girl for it.
Exactly. And,
Yep.
obviously now I am the activist and I am the poster girl in that regard.
Well, you are. Well, I want to stop for a minute because a shot I saw of you, which really stands in my mind, and I think it will for the test of time, is you here in the UAE, you're on a sand dune, you look spectacular, of course, but there you are with your bionic arm. And I start to think, here you are now leading the future, leading AI, leading, new tech, and the world seeing you differently, but also not being fearful of that you're going to crack my wrist if I shake
Yes,
your
yes,
hand,
yes. Yeah.
so it's that piece as well. So where you've gone from changing your own landscape, now your life is dedicated to changing the landscapes for others, isn't it?
Yes, it really is. And that was a lot of self-preservation and self sort of exploration for me to think the world isn't against me. This is just my reality. And I have a responsibility to be accountable for my own behavior and my actions and my words because I'm role modeling that to not only my own children, but to people all around the world. How do I want you to perceive me? Well, how am I acting? What am I showing you? And I realized that, I do have a platform and I do have a voice. And that is an honor and a privilege because I have the opportunity to not just share my story, but to give the space to be able to help other people to share theirs, because some people literally aren't able to share their story, and also metaphorically, of course. But how can I open the dialogue and the narrative up to include more people and their stories? Because storytelling is so powerful. We learn so much. I mean, this is how generations have learned everything from recipes to
The beginning of time.
Exactly.
We've
So
told
we need to
stories.
be able to support that and continue that. And I feel that, yes, my story is a part of that, but through sharing my story and being perhaps a little bit vulnerable about these particular issues, it shows other people that they can do the same. And through that, we all learn.
Correct. And it's actually real life, it's reality. So, from Paralympics, you now work with organisations right across the globe. You work with governments. And tell me about the schools, because I love this piece. You had the series of Just Yes books. It's all about recognising we are all of value for young students. And you have a goal around that of a million students or a million young people and a million books with reading. Tell me about that piece.
Yeah. So when I was pregnant with my daughter about 8 years ago, I was in the bookstore and I realized that there was such a lack of diversity in the characters that I was seeing.
Yes.
And that was a really big moment for me to think, wow, I never saw myself reflected in any of the stories that I read or any of the movies or, that I.
Not a one-armed princess.
Exactly,
No.
right? And so again, I thought, well, I have an opportunity to be part of the change. And so I thought if I could tell my story, which I'd been doing on stages all around the world with big corporate organizations and massive groups, if I could share the same message but to a much younger audience, maybe this is my legacy and my way of giving back and paying it forward. So the Just Jessica series is 3 books and it follows adventures that I have had. So my first day at school, my first swimming race, and joining the school band. So these are things that children all around the world can relate to, but it also offers a resource for parents and for teachers to be able to start really important conversations with children around diversity and difference and inclusion and respect and friendship.
And in a positive way.
Exactly, a fun way. These books aren't necessarily about disability. They're just beautiful stories that would add to any bookshelf or library around the world. But what's really interesting is it's the same message that I share with children that I do with global organizations and C-suite and government. And I think children are a much easier audience.
More accepting, aren't they, really? Because they're not saying, are there 3 stairs here? They're saying, how do we get you round the corner and up the stairs? And as you say, if there's pure acceptance, once you have acceptance, there's no moving backwards from that.
Absolutely.
Is it? So as a young child, if you're advancing in that way, that this is natural, this is normal, this is us, then you live with that in your heart, and we're actually changing generations. What do we need to do in the future? You've made a marked difference already. Recently we caught up and you were heading off to the Tokyo Marathon. You speak at literary festivals around the world. You've just been involved here in the UAE, the biggest festival.
Yes, so I had the amazing opportunity to work with the Emirates Lit Foundation and Festival here in the UAE, which is, known globally for the incredible work that it does for literature and reading and books for all ages. And I've just run the Tokyo Marathon. My life is quite segmented, but it all comes back to accessibility and inclusion. And for me, continuing to push myself physically and through movement, like running, I'm not there to go and break a record or anything like that, but I wanted a new challenge. I wanted to be able to physically prove to myself now that I could do something outside the water, outside the pool. And so I think marathon was like a bit of a midlife crisis, though, to be honest. I've done 2
I'm not
now.
sure you're in midlife yet, by the way.
Almost. And so, yeah, I mean, it's been quite an extraordinary journey. But as you say, what do we do? How can we continue to have this conversation in the future? There's more than 1.8 billion people living with disability. When we think of disability, we often think of someone who uses a wheelchair. The universal symbol and sign is a wheelchair, but only 8% of the 1.8 live with a wheelchair. And the majority of disabilities are disabilities that we cannot see. So how can we ensure that people feel that they can share their story for maybe accommodations that might need to be made for them in the workplace, in the school, in the wider community, that they're not fearful that they'll then be ridiculed or discriminated against? How do we do that? We have to look through design and thinking through the lens of disability from the beginning, instead of always trying to go back and fix things and think, oh, we didn't think of this percentage of the population. It's a huge percentage of the population. You're talking about something the same size as China. If you, from a business perspective, would not ignore that percentage of the population. So if we can encourage organizations and businesses to think, how do we include disability and how do we look at accessibility right from the beginning? And how do you do that? You have to invite people with disability or people of determination to the table to have a seat, but to actually listen to what they have to say.
And this is an interesting piece, having a seat. Working with women across the world, the focus has been for so many decades to get a woman at the table for the board meeting, to bring more women to the table, to balance it out so you have balanced voices. And yet it was never really just also about that. It's about the inclusivity piece of having different voices around the boardroom table. So it's not just two types, but it actually is representative of all types. And I think that is our great learning in the last 5 years, and our great learning for the future as well, as to it's not just about middle-aged people that have sat on different boards and they get to represent, but it's actually hearing voices that value add to the organisation or the enterprise that you're involved with. For you, leading well, what does that look like? I know you have your sports side, you have your keeping fit side, you have your mental development side as well, but what does leading well really feel like in your life?
When I think of those two words, leading well, I'm a very driven person. I'm very goal orientated and I'm always wanting to outperform and do the next thing. But now as a mother,
But hang on, with the marathon, you said it wasn't really competitive. Why do I feel in some ways? I know you're fighting yourself in that. Of course, you're a Paralympian. How could you not?
but I think leading well, I really don't like the term balance and all of this because it doesn't exist in the way that we think it does. We all wear so many different hats, and I'll always be an athlete, I'll always be a Paralympian, but I'm a mother, a wife, a sister. How do I make sure that I am showing up in those roles all the time? And it's hard to do that. So at the moment, the focus is being the best role model for my children. And that's important in every aspect of the work that I do. So for me, leading well is showing up. It doesn't matter, if I go out for a run and it's not the effort or the performance that I thought it was going to be, but I showed up and I did what I could in that moment with the resources that I had available to me in that time. Because I think what I've learned is that there's so many wonderful opportunities, but things don't just fall into our lap. We have to work hard, and that work ethic is something that I want to instill in my children, to have those morals and those values where it's about, we have to make these commitments, we have to be accountable for our actions. And so leading well is making sure that I am doing all of those things in every single aspect. So yes, my health and my fitness and the things that I eat and the things that I do for my mental well-being are all my priority, but making sure that I'm showing up and not getting to the point where, it's become too much. And I think we all prioritize this whole busyness. And I think that so many of us are busy, and that's just a reality of the lives that we are currently living. So, how do we manage that so that it doesn't jeopardize the morals and the values that we instill in who we are and what our family believes in? That's where I see it.
And I think when you say busy as well, there's a very light line between busy and overwhelm.
Yes.
And I think in the current environment, in this decade of diversity and change and acceleration for all of us in our roles, is that how do you actually not morph into everyday waking up with, what's the difference between anxiousness and anxiety? And how do you keep moving forward, but also honoring yourself? So that balance of leading well. And thank you for sharing that, because I think for many people, they see leading well as being the CEO. But it's actually the CEO, of course, of your own life, always. Before we head off, one thing, if you could change one thing in the world you live in, what would that be for the future?
You know what? This is going to sound really, really cliche, but I just wish people were kinder.
Yes.
And what do I mean by that? Can you just be a little kinder to the barista, to the taxi driver? All of these really minute interactions that we have with other people can impact how the rest of their day goes and how the rest of our day goes. And it's so overlooked. I talk about this with children, I talk about it with adults, everyone. If everyone was just kind to every single person they engage with in that particular day, and that's all you focused on, the world would be a much different and much better place.
It's so true, isn't it? And it's a very simple gesture. But to take it, it's simple to say, it is hard to actually manage for many of us on a day-to-day basis with our children. We talk about being happy when you get home and your dog comes up and you spend that time loving them. I know I do with Harry, my little schnauzer. But then sometimes I find myself not having that same exhilaration with other people or in other moments. And you're exactly right. Some of the greatest lessons I've had in the UAE have been asking questions and being kind with those that probably have been astounded in that moment that I've taken a moment with them.
Yes.
And I have learnt my greatest lessons from listening and hearing their voice and giving them the opportunity and a platform just to speak. And that's everywhere, isn't it? If we all did a little bit more of that, there's no doubt technology is changing the world and the way we see it. But that's what sets us aside as humans. So it's important we don't lose that. Well, we've loved spending time with you. I know we're going to have you back because there's so much more to talk about. We want to see once you've done every probably marathon around the world. I feel that this is somehow
I
your
know
next
it's going to
goal
be a
is you're going to do the
target. I
top
know
10
6 major.
marathons
Yeah,
around the
exactly.
world.
Exactly.
But we love the fact that you love living in the UAE and you're loving your life and you're changing the lives of all those that you get to touch, but particularly our young people, because it is the future generations that will lead us into the future. So thank you so much for joining us, Jess Smith.
Thank you, Karen. I really appreciate it.